Why was Paul writing to the Thessalonians? Who are the Thessalonians? What was his purpose? First of all, let's look at the map. Thessaly is on the northern side of the Aegean Sea on the west. Remember when Paul first comes into Greece, he crosses over, comes into Philippi, and then travels down kind of the south coast. Thessaly is his second stop. Thessalonica is the actual city that he stops in. Has great success in Thessalonica, but great persecution from the people in Philippi, which eventually drives him south into Athens and later into Corinth. When he's in Athens, he calls for Timotheus and Silas to join him. He leaves Thessalonica by himself. Sometime, either in Athens or later in Corinth, he writes the first letter, his first epistle to the Thessalonians. Now, in Acts, it's a little confusing as to how Timotheus and Silas are moving with him, and it kind of indicates that they didn't join him until he got to Corinth. But in researching a little on these epistles to the Thessalonians, it seems that they joined him in Athens and brought some news that the saints were feeling a little persecuted. There was a tension there, some stress. And so Paul sends Timothy back with a message of consolation and comfort. He then goes to Corinth, and then as we read in Acts, Timotheus and Silas join him in Corinth, and they bring word back from the Thessalonians, at which point Paul writes his first epistle. And this epistle is to give words of encouragement primarily. It teaches some doctrinal things about the second coming in order to give comfort to those who have loved ones die. Possibly some of the early Christians had already been killed or died from exposure to the persecutions that had arisen, and he is sending them this letter to comfort them, to show them that in Christ all these things will be done away. In the resurrection, all the dead are going to come back. He gives some other words of encouragement as well, and then he spends his year and a half in Corinth. Now, this first epistle would have been sent fairly early on during his time in Corinth, but he then gets word that the Thessalonians took his message of comfort a little too literally and are now looking for an immediate return of Christ, and possibly some already claiming that Christ had returned already. There may have been a false Christ in Thessaly, in the area, or at least word of a false Christ had reached them, and they were all celebrating this, and their behavior was not in line with the gospel because they thought Christ had already returned. And so Paul then writes his second epistle, which would have been near the end of his time in Corinth. Probably, he spent a year and a half in Corinth, so probably after about a year in Corinth, he sends his second epistle to straighten them out and to say, no, Christ is not coming right now. And he gives a much more detailed discourse on what's called the second advent, or the second coming. That it's not going to be for a while, so don't start acting like it's now. Don't think it's even going to be soon. It's going to be a while. But the comfort of it should still comfort us. The reality of the second coming and the resurrection is a comfort for everybody. From the time of Adam to the end, everybody is comforted in the knowledge that death is only a temporary thing. Now, these epistles were written very close together, probably no more than a year apart. And the first one was probably sent less than a year after Paul leaves Thessaly. So as I said, from what I can tell, he had to leave Thessaly he actually went to Berea first and then left Berea by himself. Comes down to Athens. While in Athens, Timothy and Silas join him. They are sent back with a message of comfort. He goes over to Corinth. They join him in Corinth, and from there he writes his first epistle. He then gets word of this false teaching of an immediate return of Christ, possibly somebody already claiming to be the returned Christ, and so he sends his second epistle to put this error right. Now, this all is happening in the early 50s, so he probably gets to Corinth in 51, maybe 52, and that's the time that he's writing these epistles. So this is about 6 years after he wrote his epistle to the Galatians, and he's been on this missionary journey through Greece now for 2 or 3 years when he writes this. This is his second missionary journey. His first one took him through Galatia in Asia Minor. His second one is going through Greece. And he's writing his epistles to the saints. Even the Galatians was written very early on after he had gone back to Antioch. Within 2 years, he's writing this epistle to the Galatians. And now, within a year, he's writing these epistles to the Thessalonians to help not only to straighten out some false doctrine that has crept in, but really to comfort them. Say, look, I know things are hard. I know you are doing your best, and I am grateful that you are still strong in the faith. But know that this is an error. This is not what I meant. So now let us read Paul's first epistle to the Thessalonians.